We have time for a few questions. If you would, please wait and let me get to you with the microphone because we like to catch both the question and the answer. Yes, sir.
Thanks for that great history, really illuminating. Looking forward, it seems like just in the last 5 to 10 years, there have been a lot more serious looks at the government level at curtailing some of the help. And we talked about people being passionate about things, go help them, and the government has helped through deductions and tax exemptions for a long, long time. And over the last 10 years, I've heard more and more about what seem to be pretty serious threats to that. I wonder, with your history in Washington and your knowledge of the topic, if you have a sense of what the climate is like right now, does that seem like a serious threat or just a passing thing?
No, it's a serious threat, and it is new. It's and it's real. Government is jealous. Government, like everything else touched by human beings, is jealous. It's jealous of power. It's jealous of resources. It's jealous of authority. And you literally get people, I've heard senators say to me, oh, this is, tens of billions of dollars that we give away every year. And you have to stop them right there and say, actually, you're not giving away anything. This is people's money. This is other people's money. This is not money that the government owns or has control over, or should have purview over. This is private resources. And this is, as I mentioned to you, this is self-government in action. You should be encouraging this, not discouraging this. And there are smart people who realize that. There's a guy I admire who came up with this great term. He says that the best people in government are smart relinquishers. They know when to let go. They know when to not try to do something that somebody else can do better. And the example he uses was an industry he was actually involved in himself. He was one of the guys who went down to New Orleans right after Katrina and helped set up the new school system. And the main thing that they did there that was just magical was they let go. They let donors come in and set up basically a parallel system which completely replaced this horrible, corrupt, crummy public school system that had dominated in New Orleans for years and years. They relinquished power. They stepped away. And yeah, you have to set the rules and you have to make sure people are, fair and there's not discrimination take place. All that can be done without becoming the operator. So there is an alternative here, and there are good things happening as well. But you're quite right. Both of the presidential candidates right now are basically talking about capping or curtailing the charitable deduction, as if that's like a favor they do to let you keep your own money and use it for something else. There is an argument that this is government money, and that they're just giving it back to you to use it for charity. That is a completely bankrupt argument. There's actually a section at the very back of the almanac where I talk about that. Talk about the kind of the legal and constitutional basis of considering charitable funds to be under the control of the individual, not to be under the control of the state. Yeah, that's a big deal right now. As I say, I don't think we're at a tipping point. Another thing that worries me is a huge amount of charity is done under religious auspices, okay? In fact, the numbers are quite striking. I don't know if you realize about a third of all charity goes through religious channels. Now, it doesn't mean that's all going to churches. When you send money to World Vision, that's a Christian charity that helps poor kids in Tanzania, all right? Or if you put money into a Catholic school, that's not strictly speaking religion. That's a social project that has a religious sponsor. But religion is a huge motivator for giving and a huge organizer of some of the best execution of charity today. And I'm very concerned that I'm starting to hear arguments I never used to hear. I'm hearing people say that churches shouldn't be tax exempt now. I'm hearing people say that we know that there's all kinds of people who say that it should be basically illegitimate for people to use religious arguments or religious justifications in the public sphere. In addition to all of the huge constitutional problems and just gigantic liberty problems that poses. This was a country founded so that people could practice their religion freely, openly, without hiding it under a basket. So there's problems there. But in addition to that, just as a practical matter, religious people are hugely important in social work in this country. For instance, practicing Christians adopt hard-to-place children at about 3 or 4 times the rate of other people. You want to talk about who mentors prisoners who are get out of prison, who need help to kind of get a job and get set up in an apartment so they don't go back to crime? Huge amount of that is done by churches today. this is a really important part of our social healing. It's done by religious people. So if we're in an environment where there's this open hostility to religion and kind of constant drumbeat that makes religious people feel like they need to keep their head down, it's not healthy. It's not healthy at all. So that's another aspect of this.
Karl, I'd like to ask a somewhat related question to that. Have you seen any empirical evidence that the government acting in spaces crowds out charitable investment in those spaces?
Yeah, no question about that. I mean, there's all kinds of examples. Little things would be Meals on Wheels. Meals on Wheels was this really wonderful, spontaneous creation of local people, and then became a was nationalized basically by the federal government. And I think surely with the best of intentions, but it just kind of lost its juice, kind of lost its energy, kind of lost a lot of its enthusiasm and the kind of the personal spirit that made it a somewhat magical program in the beginning, that it was bringing not only food to someone's door, but it was bringing camaraderie and a personal connection. And there's lots of examples of that. So yeah, that's a real risk. You hear a lot today about people that say they want to have public-private partnerships. And that's a phrase that kind of sets off alarm bells a little bit for us at the Philanthropy Roundtable, because the raw fact is that as a matter of practice, that often means that the philanthropy gets eaten by the blob. The blob just comes in and kind of starts providing a lot of money, and then it starts providing all the rules, and then it says you got to take the crucifixes down from the walls in this church school, and next thing you know, you're in a completely unexpected place. And you've lost a lot of that personal enthusiasm and intimacy and passion that really makes philanthropy magical. So that's a real risk, and it's a fine line we have to walk. I mean, there's no anarchists in this auditorium. I don't think any of us want to have no government, but I think all of us want to be real careful that we don't turn philanthropy into just kind of another branch of bureaucracy. That has happened in lots of places, and it really is not producing good results.
Someone else? This side can ask too.
What prompts a non-philanthropic person to become philanthropic?
I'm not sure how often that happens, honestly. I think a lot of this is kind of cradle. Obviously there are many motivations, but we certainly see it a lot in our work that they say, at some point, I remembered my mom, or I remember what my father used to do, or I remembered my grandma or something. There is a huge amount of kind of, I think, cultural transmission that takes place here. And I do wonder sometimes, if you don't have that original role model, you don't have that original example, can you kind of find your way into this? Clearly, you can, and some people do. They reason their way into it, maybe, or they learn from experience, or they have their heart broken in some way. They lose a loved one, and the next thing you know, they have a motivation. So that happens. But I think it's also quite clear that the habit, Tocqueville, we heard about Tocqueville in my introduction. Tocqueville said that helping other people is kind of a social muscle. It's something you just kind of do, and it gets strong, and you do more of it. You get used to it. And he said that that's really important, to kind of keep that muscle toned. And if you lose the tone, it's a lot harder to start from scratch. So I think the cultural transmission is really important. And you have to remind yourselves, folks, I don't want you to lose sight of how freakish this is. There is no other country that does this. This is not normal. In fact, this is irrational in a lot of ways. It's more rational to be selfish and greedy, just grasp your money and hold it tight to your chest. It's really weird the way we do things. Our closest kind of, the only other country that's even approaches us is Canada. We're, of course, kissing cousins culturally. And even Canada only gives at about 40% of our rate per capita. And then you hit the Brits would be next, and they're at about 25% of our rate. And then it just falls off a cliff. I mean, the Germans, the French, the Japanese, they don't give any money away. They don't know any of this. It's completely foreign. The Chinese think it's bizarre. There just is no tradition in other places. This is cultural. This is something that we started. It basically has a religious root. This is Jewish and Christian religion with a little bit of American kind of frontier ethic, the barn raising, spirit of cooperation that was so important in our early communities. And with a third element I would describe that kind of is a big part of it, making it distinctive in America is the entrepreneurial aspect. This, who knows where it comes from, but it's now rooted, is this notion that if you make a big pile of money from nothing in this country, you eventually get into philanthropy. It's just almost expected. You know, Rockefeller did it, Carnegie did it. Now, in those days, they did it at the end of their life, after they were done working. That was an old man's game. That's not the case anymore. Now Zuckerberg does it when he's 30, all right? So that is maybe one of the encouraging trends, is that there is this clear impulse among the entrepreneurial crowd that this is kind of one part of your responsibility as a good citizen. After you've had a very successful business, then you start helping other people succeed. So that's great. But that's only, as I say, one of the three strands that I would identify as crucial. You know, the religious strand and the kind of the frontier, you know, kind of neighborly community strand, and then the entrepreneurial strand. And two of the three of those are kind of in decline. And the entrepreneurship is kind of in, I'd say, holding its own, but not exactly booming. Certainly not among millennials today, alas. So we'll see. We'll see.
One more?
You've illustrated how charitable our country is, yet the statistics that I've heard, unverified, are that Christians on average give 2.5% of income, and others in our country give about 1% of income. Have you confirmed that at all?
Yep, you're in about the right range. I mean, it's a little hard to, you know, even the definition of what a Christian is obviously tricky, but that's the right range. It's sort of between 1 and 3%. Our national average is around 2% and has been for about 50 years. Now, again, that's a lot higher than any other country, and 2% is not trivial. I mean, I showed you that GDP, I mean, you know, 5% of GDP is the entire national defense business today. That's a lot of money, so it's not trivial, but you're right. I think your implicit point is one that I would underline, which is that we can do more. We can do a lot more. And plenty of us would like to see us do a lot more. You know, if in my parents' generation, in the 40s and 50s, they were giving 2%, we should be able to do more than 2% today. Disposable income is up, discretionary income is up. I mean, I grew up, I was one of 5 children. We had 1 bathroom in the house. Looking back, you'd probably have a child abuse case today if you try to raise kids with that. That was normal. Everyone had 1 bathroom with, you know, no basement. I mean, that was the standard of living. The standard of living is not that today. I'm quite sure that we as a society could find room for more than 2% of our income on average. And there are people who do. I mean, I should have showed you, there's some really just amazing data on where the most generous parts of the country are. It's not at all what you expect. It's not New York City. It's not San Francisco, believe me. It's basically the Bible Belt and Mormon America. Those are the places that really give big time as a percentage. So we could do more, and plenty of people do more, but it's all about, first of all, understanding how consequential it is when you do more. That's one of the reasons I'm giving these talks and wearing my voice out, is because I really think if people understood this, they would feel better about giving. And you know, just kind of really understanding that you're part of something really productive and beautiful, I think would motivate some people.
If the government takes away the charitable deduction, what's the role of the church?
Interesting. That's, of course, a huge guess, but there have been a lot of people thinking about that. We know that it would knock down giving, that it would have an effect on giving, and that it would vary radically by sector. Listen, most of the people are still going to give to their church, whether they can deduct it or not. That's done for other than rational reasons, for other than economic reasons. That's not going to go away. But the giving to art museums, best guesses are about half of that would evaporate if you eliminate or sharply curtail the deduction. And, you know, education would be somewhere in between, I would have to guess. So there's no question it would be down. Now, the good news is we are a generous people who give for other than self-interested reasons, and a lot of us would continue to give even if it wasn't. But, you know, there's only so much blood in the turnip. You can't just squeeze and squeeze and squeeze. If you're giving more in taxes, that's less that you feel able to give to other purposes. And lots of us would rather have people feel like, to the extent they have money that they can play with, that's mad money that they can direct as they choose, we'd like them to direct it directly, rather than to write a check to somebody impersonal in a distant location who is going to apportion it in a very bureaucratic way. So I can't give you a specific answer, but we know it would hurt.
Karl, thank you. Thank you for tonight.
My pleasure.